Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to another episode of EOTT, Everything on the Table with me, Jimmy James. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our brother from across the pond, Kilindi Iyi. Kilindi, how are you, brother?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate taking the time to come and chat with us, because I know you're a busy fella. You're there and everywhere. And my brother Mark Slee introduced me to your work about 2 years ago. He said, "Have you heard of this guy, Kilindi Iyi?" I was like, "No." He's like, "You need to check him out." And yeah, I was looking into it. I was blown away, but I didn't get into it in too much depth there. And I had a few things that came up in the meantime. But your breaking convention talk, accessing kinetic subquantum reality through hallucinogens, a couple of weeks ago, just blew me away. But the main part of it was, as is always the case with these kind of conventions and talks, Kilindi, I remember you saying you had to condense 4 hours down into kind of 30 minutes. So it was a kind of a synopsis then, if you like, of your kind of work that you've been doing in that field. And there's lots of different things I'd like to get into with you during our conversation. But if you'd be so kind, brother, I'm pretty sure you didn't wake up one day and decide, come on then, let's go for it and take 40 grams. Would you be kind enough to give us a little bit of a background into kind of how you got into this field? I know you're a keen kind of martial artist, and I think has this come kind of alongside with it, your kind of work with the hallucinogens?
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the show and talk with your audience. My name is Kilindi Iyi.
Kilindi Iyi, forgive me.
And how I basically got into dealing with mushrooms specifically is that I'm a traditional martial artist, African martial artist, and inside of that, they have different compounds and potions that you take for the higher learning. And what I did was made some cross correlations with hallucinogenic mushrooms once I got a chance to take them myself. And that happened because a friend of mine, we were all at the time reading different works and things like that. And we came across Carlos Castaneda, and we were reading about Don Juan and Don Gennaro, Carlos's ordeals going through the warriorship of the Yaqui way of knowledge. So my friend went down to Oaxaca, and specifically San Jose de Pacifico in Mexico, and he brought mushrooms back. And one afternoon, we took the mushrooms in his backyard and started talking to the trees, and the trees started talking to us. And that was basically my first journey. My first high dose journey was the next time that he released some of the mushrooms to me. I took them alone by myself in the dark and at high dose, because even though it was a wonderful experience that first time, I didn't think that I had enough, because I wasn't seeing things flying through the air and things like that. So I just took the whole bag. I don't know what it was, but looking back on it, it was quite a bit.
A rough idea, Kilindi? A rough idea? 5 grams, 7, 10, possibly?
No, it was more than 10. It was probably in the 20-gram range or something like that, from what I can remember.
Fair play. Respect, brother, respect.
And that basically set me on the course of dealing with mushrooms. And for several years, he would go yearly to Mexico and send mushrooms back or bring mushrooms back and things like that. Then when he stopped going down there, there was a dearth in me being able to get mushrooms. So I set on the path of mycology to grow mushrooms. And for quite a while there, I grew some of the most beautiful mold that has ever been, because the learning curve didn't have YouTube, it didn't have the PF Tech and things like that. You had to go and delve into actual mycology. So I gleaned the stacks going through the Dewey Decimal System and things like that in the main library. And over time, I got to where I was growing mushrooms. I mean, I had good success at the time. And then my study over the years of mycology and things like that brought me to where I was a pretty good grower. And that's basically what started me off in the mushroom realms. And then, of course, when the internet broke open and, you started dealing with easier techniques. I learned those also, but I basically went back to the mycological area to grow at a more efficient rate, because the PF Tech is basically a good amateur technique for people who aren't mycologists or people who are hobbyists to be able to grow. And now there's the grow bag, which is basically an easier technique, because you just inject the bag and the mushrooms grow in the bag. And it's very similar to a technique that in the 1970s High Times had, where you would just basically turn a little dial on top of a plastic container, and the spores were in that particular container, and they would drip into the substrate, and then you get mushrooms like that if you were lucky.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I've been looking myself. I've been doing a bit of research into the whole growing techniques, and as you say, with the joys of the internet now, it's just anyone can learn to do anything. Can I ask you, Kilindi, this is something I've been thinking about the last couple of days, really. We have all these different kind of strains from all around the globe, your Amazonian mushrooms, your Cubensis B+. And with regards to mycelium, now you're talking about mycelium has been on the planet hundreds of millions of years longer than plants, pretty much from the beginning, shall we say. Now, with the different strains of mushrooms, do we think that ultimately the mycelium is a whole connected network as one? Or do you think it's possible that wherever the mycelium came from, let's just say for argument's sake, it came in on comets or anything like that, kind of spores, that there have been different, I think I haven't got a better word than types, different types, and that there are kind of, do you know that there are different strains for cannabis? Are there different, with the different types of mushrooms, people talk about different experiences then, if you like. So for example, McKenna are a lot more visual, people say this, and a few other different kind of comparisons and contrasts between the different strains. Is the mycelium fundamentally at its core one entity then, if you like, or are there different kind of families or entities? Does that make sense?
Well, there are different families. Psilocybin mushrooms are pan-tropical. In other words, they grow in most of the tropical areas of the world. So they have a particular energy and strain. I'm an exponent, of the areas of knowledge that are part simulation and computer algorithms, computer programs. Psilocybin has a particular algorithm, and that algorithm, that particular program, runs inside of it. Now you have, according to environment, different areas of information that they pick up from nature and the environment of which they come into. In other words, they come in with information and they pick up information from the particular environment they're in and the particular peoples that they have. We look at that there's 27 different or have been 27 different types of humanoids on Earth from different places. So once you take the mushroom takes you. So it takes that information and it puts it through the computer program, and it will have what are seemingly differences, but they're not really differences. They're just addendums from the natural environment and the people who have been taking it. That information goes into the mushroom, and the mushroom will exhibit that. But psilocybin as a compound is basically the same thing. It just has certain areas of information that may be from the environment and the people in that environment, and the mixture of all of that inside of a very dense and highly informational computer source. So in Cambodia, the mushrooms will produce the temples of Angkor Wat. In Mexico, they will produce the Olmec, Toltec, Aztec civilizations and the pyramid of the sun and the moon and things like that. In ancient Kemet or Egypt, you will produce Tekken, which are the bin stones. You produce Hippel-style halls, pyramids, the Sphinx and things like that. In other places, in Australia, you'll produce dream time and certain areas and certain sophistries of the places that these particular mushrooms grow. But basically and fundamentally, the psilocybin mycelium is a network that feeds upon itself and feeds upon the structures of which it encounters as it goes through different dimensions and different galaxies and through the infraparticle realms, which are the subatomic realms, the quantum realms, and also the macro universal realms that it encounters as it goes through its sojourn and journey throughout the multiverse, and also the very, very small quantum realms. So it will pick up information and take that and put it through and come out with something that is absolutely new and unheard of, or it will bolster and strengthen some of the particular points of knowledge that are inherent within a particular species or particular people, because not just humans, human beings encountered mushrooms and ate them, but also other creatures and novel entities have also taken mushrooms and added their information to that whole plenum. That's why people's, you have things like the shapeshifters and animal totems and all these different type of things. These are all part of the mushroom compendium, and how they lend these structures to the human consciousness through what we may deem and think is imagination, but it's all generated from these very, very small particles in those computer programs that build the macro reality of which we exist in.
Yeah, thank you, Kilindi. I think so. It's almost as if then, I know you talked about in terms of kind of blockchain technology, the comparison, and it does seem to be now that we are coming to a place where we're kind of seeing that, quantum physicists are saying that, this is some kind of simulation, and it does seem to be that computer language seems to be the best kind of language for us to be able to describe and get to grips with these kind of experiences and what we're experiencing. So kind of like, are you saying then basically that the kind of almost regional libraries then, if you like, with regards to where the mycelium patches have grown with the kind of people who, and the animals as well, who are in those areas, which kind of makes sense to me. But fundamentally, when you get to the core of it, it is all essentially going to take you to the same place. Is that where we're getting at?
Well, I mean, there are standalone places that have absolutely nothing to do with other places. Is according to where you're going and where the mushroom has been and where it's going to take you and where you're going to take it. So it is informational structure, a blockchain, a distributed informational structure, which is in meaning that you can still go to many of the same places that, say, if you have the Australian strain and you have the Thailand strain, they'll give you different signatures, but the information is on the blockchain, of which Helena Petrova-Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society back in the late 19th century, earliest 20th century, talked about as the Akashic records, or what we call records of the Acacia, which is the DMT compendium of knowledge and information, of which psilocybin is a part of that blockchain. So when you have the different acacias and the different mimosas and the phalaris grass and canary grass and all of the areas of, in plants and in animals and things like that contain DMT and are generating DMT. DMT is the blockchain. But the thing is that mushrooms are sufficient within themselves without any addendum of delivering that information. And we found that also that canary grass and a couple of other grasses have inside of them, they have not only DMT, but they have 5-MeO-DMT, and they also have inner monoamine oxidase inhibitors, of which humans have also, such as pinealine and also endogenous beta-carbolines that act as monoamine oxidase inhibitors inside of the human. But the mushroom itself is fully functional without even the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So we see that as being special because the fungal kingdom is older than the plant kingdom, it's older than the animal kingdom, and it's older than the other kingdoms on earth. We see that as a primary source of that information that distributed the information through the other DMTs, blockchain like throughout the earth. So that mycelium network is hooked to plants and it's hooked to animals, you know, and it intercalates into DNA, and DNA is a blockchain. So when the mycelium network set itself up, it is in contact with plants because there's a mycorrhizal relationship between plants and fungi. And when the animals ate the plants or they ate the fungi, that information passed into the DNA. And the same with the mushrooms when they grew fully themselves and people ate them or animals ate them, and all of the different animals and insects and things tried it as a food source. Even a little bit was enough to impart that information for it to be structurally sound enough to be able to, when you encountered that type of informational structure later on, you were already in your DNA on the blockchain for that information to merge with the mushroom and fungi that's already there. And then it's in, of course, the plants and animals and other things. That's how you get the frog with the 5-MeO, then yopo and other things that would have the 5-MeO, because there are sources of 5-MeO that don't come from the frog. And then there is informational structures that lend their information to society. So it built chemistry coming from Kemet. Kemet, the highest form of science in Kemet, was alchemy. And that alchemy dealing with the tree of life, which is the Acacia nilotica and mushrooms and things like that. So you have this, again, blockchain-like informational structure that is permeated through the whole world, through the earth, and that information is there. So mushrooms just liberate the access of being able to tap into that information at times when you want to be able to do it, when you decide to do it, rather than it being an endogenous type of thing, because people always talk about, well, can I do that myself? And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess you can, sure. You know, you have all of the makings of being able to do that, but there are certain safeguards put in your consciousness so that these things don't happen endogenously. That's why, you know, if you want to accumulate that DMT in your system and be able to utilize it, you have to go into darkness for 21 to 40 days or something like that. And that makes sure that you're not out in traffic driving, and make sure that you're not, baking a cake in the oven and you go into a hyperdimensional state and forget about the cake and burn the house down. So there's safeguards that stop you from being able to just do it on the natch when you feel like it, because that takes a lot of control. And even the systems that people talk about as meditation, yoga, qigong, tai chi, and all of the other mystic arts were always paired with entheogenic plants, fungi, compounds, so that these things were addendums to that. They weren't the main focus. In other words, meditation is not the main focus. Entheogens and utilizing the discipline that you gain in meditation is really what it's about. So these things are sidebars to the psychedelics.
More of a holistic thing. Thank you, Kilindi. I appreciate that. What popped up for me, I was watching your chat with the brothers from the True Life Stories, your little 3-hour kind of live chat, which was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. I missed it and I need to get back to it. But what you did cover, what I found fascinating, was the uncategorized mushrooms in Africa, for example. Now, you know, we know about we know about all the stuff that they've essentially categorized so far. And the reason I ask about that is because it makes sense, given the narrative of what's gone on in Africa, you know, the occupation, et cetera, that there will be many, many different species still left to discover. Now, with regards to myself, I have a friend who whenever they use DMT primarily for exploring. They've not gone deep with mushrooms yet, but every DMT experience results in entity contact, and there've been some amazingly kind of mind-blowing experiences. But the one was an experience with two energetic beings, and they were telling this person, you humans, you're doing well, but you're nowhere near where you need to be, and we've been trying to help you, and we've taken plants from your Mother Earth to our Mother Earth, and we've given you plants from our Mother Earth to your Mother Earth. Now, this person was having the experience. I was sitting with them. They were having the experience, and they'd already been told about this prior, and they'd forgotten. And during this experience, they were velvitch, velvitcher. And when they came around, they were like, oh no, I've forgotten. Now, if that person had been alone, they probably would have forgotten. But because I was there, I was like, what, velvitcher? And they were like, velvitcher. I'm like, what's velvitcher? They said, this is velvitcher. This is something this year that we've not discovered, and all the rest of it. So I Googled velvitcher. It's Velvitcher mirabilis. It's classified as the ugliest plant in the world, and it's this kind of dual frond that grows in the desert in Africa. It just kind of blew my mind a little bit because, you know, the person had no prior knowledge to the things they were talking about. I had no prior knowledge of it. Is this a common theme, Kilindi, that you see on your travels, on your own personal travels, and for other people? You know, information that comes back and checks out, which kind of adds a whole new dimension to the experience?
Well, I mean, the multiverse doesn't have the same time construct that we have, and many times you will, of course, encounter different entities, novel creatures, and things like that. And then there's certain knowledges of certain plant flora, fauna that don't adhere to our time construct. So you will have many times plants, you know, there was Pangea where the continents were kind of pushed together. And then also time the continental drift happens. But really up until recently, if, you know, a lot of talk is about the younger Dryas going on now. The asteroidal or comet or meteor impacts that happened 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago that changed the face of the earth, because many times you had still land bridges that connected, just like Morocco to Gibraltar and the bottom of the Iberian Peninsula, which is, you know, today Spain. Malaga, Spain, and things like that, where you could actually just walk the 17 miles separating Africa and separating Europe. And then, of course, the only thing that stops you from walking to China and things like that is the Suez Canal. Then you have the Indonesian archipelago, which is now a series of islands, which are just the tips and tops of mountains and land ranges that were above the water, because during the Younger Dryas, when that impact hit, the ice that it threw into the oceans raised the water table 400 feet, which drowned out most of the civilizations that were living on the coast at the time. So you have this type of thing that changed the dynamics of the earth. South America and Africa both have rainforests, and those rainforests many times have the same plants, fauna and flora, but then there's something that different, because Africa wasn't as affected by the Younger Dryas period as so much as South America and North America. It hit in North America, set the whole bottom half of the continent on fire, destroyed, drowned out a lot of the fauna and flora, created deserts in certain places and things like that. That's why the Sahara today is encroaching into the usable land, because you have this desert moving, moving in all directions. That was because of the change of climate, or climate change, which is a big buzzword today. So a lot of the things like the megafauna, which are any animal over 100 pounds is considered the megafauna. In the North America, part of South America, Mexico, a lot of the large land animals were killed out. Scientists up until now, where the Younger Dryas climatologists and geologists are now understanding that the large animals in North America were killed out, but in Africa, a lot of the animals still stayed because it wasn't as affected. And that's the same thing with plants. Certain plants went away, certain plants flourished because of climate change. That's the whole thing talking about the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas is about a flower that's an Arctic flower. So after the last ice age, the Pleistocene, when it became warmer and the temperatures, the temperatures became more temperate, the Younger Dryas flower, the driest flower, died out. It was no longer there. So if the climate hadn't changed, you'd never knew that there was a Dryas flower, because that flower only proliferates in the Arctic weather. So when the Younger Dryas, that was the older Dryas. The Younger Dryas is when that plant that had died out came back because the earth was again plunged into Arctic temperatures. So as the climates change, you'll see certain mushrooms whose spores may be embedded somewhere. They will flourish because of a certain climate. If that climate leaves, it'll no longer be significant or prominent. It's just like places in, say, the Congo or Zaire and things like that. They're places that have never been explored by explorers. You have people that live there, but never been looked at as far as what type of plants they have, what type of fungi they have, and things like that, because they at the time they couldn't encroach in because of the density of the rainforest. And at the time they were doing a lot of that exploring, the horses couldn't go in because they had the tsetse fly, which affects the horse but not the human beings. So you have many different mushroom species that have just not been identified. Most of the fungi has not been identified. That's even here in North America and every place else. It hasn't been studied. But Africa was basically disavowed of that because, number one, the whole 19th going into the 20th century with National Geographic and Stanley and, Stanley and Watson, or Stanley, whatever those guys were, the explorers. Mm-hmm. The dark continent, stay away from Africa, has no culture, that type of thing. So they didn't look in Africa for hallucinogenic fungi. They said that Africa was sparse in hallucinogenic fungi, and nobody had ever went to study. But it has the oldest and deepest knowledge and information about fungi and mushrooms, because we have records of it that have been written or painted on cave paintings, and it's also in the culture and the utilization of the different sciences that they have that were called witchcraft and all those different type of things, the witch doctor and the medicine man and all of those different types of things, which today they have generally and colloquially called the shaman. So anybody who's not a priest, rabbi, or imam in the three major religious structures of the earth is now called a shaman, because
blanket term cover all,
blanket term to term to catch everybody who's not one of those three, which is to basically put them in a inferior position, even though they have the oldest knowledge of spiritualism, of herbalism, and those type of things, much older than the Abrahamic religious structures. By saying shaman, that says, okay, this is a spiritual person, but they're not really as holy as the rest of the main three.
Yeah, thank you, Kilindi. I appreciate what you're saying, and it does resonate. And just on a random aside, I've been looking a lot into kind of the Tamerrian narrative, the mud flood societal reset, and somebody showed me a picture the other day, which was purportedly from the Congo, but it was it was in the ruins, but it was a kind of a fairy tale type castle, and obviously we can't confirm whether or not it is real, but it wouldn't surprise me to know that, all these kind of explored areas, there's probably narratives that would just completely blow. We already know that there's stuff that blows the official narrative apart, but I think, the stuff that we know, a lot of it, there's way, way, way more of it. For example, just like Iboga, for instance, ibogaine, I was looking into it. Such a phenomenally powerful, I think it's the tree bark, right? Or the extract of the tree bark.
Bark, bush bark, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just able to essentially energetically reset the body over kind of a period of 24 hours, give or take, or whatever, and kind of can be very, very beneficial for people who want to kind of break out of physical addictions, heroin, and those kind of things. Have you had any experience with any of that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, I haven't taken a full dose of iboga because that's 3 days and that's done traditionally.
It's not messing around, is it? There's no joke with the iboga. Serious business.
No, I mean, a lot of people, you know, who have taken it for opiate cessation or something like that, those aren't the doses that they give you in the true traditional sense. It's an actual ordeal, goes on about 3 days, and very, very few people get to that phase. You have to go through the traditional utilization of it for that whole thing to really open up for you as far as the iboga is concerned. It's and then in many cases you have 3 different sections of iboga. You have a modern sect, you have a sect that's merged with other religions, then you have the old iboga, which is very, very few people get to, and I haven't gotten to that. I've been invited to come, but I haven't taken them up on that as of yet because of my schedule, and I'm, you know, not really relishing going through the whole thing.
I resonate with that, brother. I do resonate with that.
It's a definite ordeal, and you know, the thing about iboga is that you can kill yourself with it, and you have to take enough to where you're just about killing yourself to get the full experience.
Yes.
So I think, you know, before I get out of here, I will do the iboga, but I just haven't done it as of yet. But I've talked to some of the Ngangas about that, and it's a really deep and powerful experience.
Yes, no doubt. Thank you, brother. And yeah, it's one of those, as you say, not to be relished because it's, you know, it's people talk about going into ayahuasca or do mushrooms. There's kind of levels to these kind of things, and that's your kind of ancient, where living tribally, living as these tribal people have done for thousands of years and whatever. It's the kind of thing that's worked towards over decades and decades, I imagine, or years and years at least, or probably a couple of decades of sustained practice. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, the thing is that a lot of information is covered up in ancient ruins and temples and things like that in Central Africa, which have been covered over with the foliage of the jungle, of the rainforest. Many of the ancient stories, of which like H. Rider Haggard talked about in his series of books, Nanda the Lily, you know, King Solomon's Mines, Alan Quatermain. These books that he had written, he took from stories of a old Zulu warrior named Umslopogis, who told him and talked about these ancient stories of King Solomon's Mines and all of these different type of entities and creatures that lived in the books, just in the bush, just like Credo Mutua, who talks about, you know, eating aliens, and the Chitahuri and others, which abound. But these things are buried under the, you know, just like in South America, you had the different cities that were right in the vicinity of different places, and people never knew because the jungle basically, you know, covered it up, you know. And even in looking in that, you know, you never say in South America, you never really say the jungle, you say the rainforest, but in Africa you say the jungle because that's something wild and, you know, things like that. But these stories were imparted to H.R. Haggard, and he, you know, basically had written them down, and they became basically the precursor of the hero, because Alan Quatermain in the 19th century and things like that, that's what every British boy wanted to be, because at that time it wasn't no Superman, it wasn't the, you know, it wasn't no Batman and things like that. It was the adventurers who, you know, went to exotic places at the time, who were the heroes. So Alan Quatermain was he was the Indiana Jones, the Superman, the Batman, and things like that, that every British boy wanted to be, because that was an adventurer going out alone, and those books sold, you know, they really sold. And then, you know, you have John Carter on Mars and things like that came later, that basically was the first extraterrestrial sojourn of a hero, a guy who went to Mars and became, you know, like the king of Mars. But
Yeah.
as far as a real guy, Alan Quatermain was the guy that was the superhero of the, you know, the 19th century. Like
Yeah,
that.
the original. Thank you, brother. I did chuckle. When we were listening to the chat with the real life stories, talking about the artist from the Alien movies, you know, and they say,
Yes.
"Oh, how did you make all this stuff up?" And he's like, "I didn't make any of this stuff up." And it seems to be it's art imitating life.
Yeah.
Art imitating life. A lot of this stuff, and like I say, some of the experiences people have had that I've sat for. For me personally, Kilindi, I can't profess to have gone uber deep with mushrooms. As a younger man, kind of went a little bit deeper, but just kind of mediocre exploring, I guess you could call it. But with the DMT, I can't retain anything. I just black it all out. I think that's quite common for quite a lot of people. With regards to extended journey, I know you're talking about DMTX and kind of, you know, taking these large doses, it kind of be an extended journey. For you personally, how much retention do you have of the experience? Not that that's the purpose of it, to be able to regurgitate it for others. I don't mean it like that. I just mean for your own personal kind of integration and growth. Do you find that it's a kind of, how do you find it? Do you retain a lot? Do you find sometimes you don't retain a lot?
I mean, I retain it. It's an art form, and you have to, if you're a person that blacks out, you got to jiggle with your doses.
This is it, yeah.
And that is what'll get you over the hump. And then practice, you know. You can't take it 2 times and not remember and say, oh, well, I never remember, so it doesn't make any sense to do that. Number one, it's creating new dendrite connections, new neural connections in your brain. Even if you don't remember it, it's still moving your consciousness forward. And though you may not consciously remember it, you still remember it subconsciously. So to retain it or to remember it on a conscious level, you have to, you know, manipulate the doses that you're taking. Sometimes it's like in dealing with, say, nanotech, or if you deal with picotech, which is right above it, people say there's no information in there. Now there's information in there, it's just not information that you can retain. And then you go to, say, femtotech, there's a plethora of information in there. But the thing is with your consciousness, you have to maybe go under the dose a little bit and you'll get retention, or you go over the dose. Maybe you have a blind spot in that particular dosage range that you can't, you know, that you're not retaining right now. So if at 50 micrograms or you're not retaining, you go to 60, and maybe you'll get a better rendition that way. But you move the dose, and then you just can't do it 2 times. You have to hit it over and over and over, because it's not a one-time thing. You continue to push forward. You continue to practice your retention of your experience.
That makes sense. Thank you, brother. Yeah, because I've got some people who I know, one specific person who just has perfect recall on DMT, which I hadn't experienced personally, and not many other people do. And it was just a fascinating prospect that some people are perhaps more predisposed then, if you like, or perhaps, I don't know whether it's to do with, you know, genetics and bloodlines and that kind of stuff. I'm not too sure. But yeah, and you made the correct point there, because I have kind of took a little bit of a backseat, because like the last time I did DMT, the only thing I remember is this horrific projectile vomiting, like something out of the movies, you know, and
Mm.
I came around and I was looking in all the rooms to try and find out where I'd vomited, but it wasn't there. And I was like, is that telling me something there? Is it telling me I've took too much? Or is it telling me perhaps I need to do some work in this realm before trying to venture into this realm? You know, and what I love about you, Kilindi, is big respect. I reached out to you, were like, yeah, cool, we'll book it in whenever. There was none of this like, oh, what's your channel about? How many subscribers do you have? Any of that nonsense. And I love what you say about, you know, there are no experts. There are no kind of masters in this field. We are kind of just one big family helping each other along the way. And whilst we're still under this kind of legal problem where it's restricted here, there, and everywhere, we are kind of up against it. But it's not until I think we've got free reign, free access, the correct facilities, which have all been repurposed for those who are willing and are ready and are able, because you know there is a lot of clinical studies going on, but for me personally, I don't really think probably these clinical environments are conducive possibly to the best kind of outcomes and experiences. I know you said you like to take it in bed. I personally do not like to take them around other people. I find it very disconcerting and disrupting to my own experience, because you know, I can come around and someone's there with me, I don't even know who that person is, you know, that kind of thing. What fascinated me was I was listening to Joe Rogan chatting with Alex Jones. Now, you know, say what you will about Alex Jones, I've had some good information from him over the years, and he was, yeah, exactly. You got to take the rough with the smooth, you know, you got to use your discernment and all the rest of it. And what came to me during a couple of my first DMT experiences was, and I already knew about government black projects, MK Ultra, LSD, and all this, and I thought, these Silicon Valley lot, they must be doing black projects, NDA programs with DMT and all this kind of stuff, and exploring stuff in these clinical settings and all the rest of it. And then listening to Alex Jones, and he was talking about deep military, people who've obviously gone through screening processes, shown their proclivity or their ability to be able to navigate and all this kind of stuff, and using these Palantirs, crystal balls. And then lo and behold, you're talking about the same thing. Can you talk to me a bit about this, please, and how this came about, first of all, and what the kind of progress is and what you're doing?
Well, I mean, it's Atlantean technology, you know. I've always read books and things on crystals and stuff like that. The New Age, you know, you put them in a circle, put the biggest one in the middle, light a candle, and you know, chant around and things like that. But paired with the mushrooms or DMT containing plants or whatever, it opens up the computer, the structure of this, and you are able then to download experiences into the crystal, and you are able to take information from the crystal, from where its attachments are and have been under its structure. So Atlantean technology was based upon crystal technology. We learned this from the crystals themselves, because it being them growing on Earth and having the history of Earth inside of them, because they grow in the you know, in the ground, in the caves and things like that. The structure is already there. So when Atlantis was destroyed and the seven sages went to different places, this crystalline information went with them. So we're just at the point of resurrecting this Atlantean Egyptian technology, because basically in Europe, the gypsies took the whole crystal ball thing into Europe proper, and men like John Dee and Edward Kelly with scrying mirrors and crystal balls and things like that.
This has come up, yeah.
You know, John Dee being the man who had the most books in all of Europe, and he had about 1,000 books in his library. And of course, they burnt his library down. He went to Prague with under the auspices of King Rudolph of Bohemia, and I had a chance to, when I was in Prague, really a few times, to go to the Alchemist Museum in Prague, which they found when a street there collapsed. It's in the second oldest house in Prague, and it was built in like 700. So the house is that's 20, that's like 1,400 years old, and it's still in perfect condition. And I mean, you go in and, you push the griffin on the bookshelf, and the bookshelf slides back like an old, Dracula movie or something like that. Winding staircase, and then they have tunnels down there, and they have their alchemical spots where they were, trying to change lead to gold and all the different things that the alchemists do. But and their scrying mirrors and crystal balls and things like that are what they were using to, deal with telling the future and all those different type of things. So this is how you have the gypsies telling the future and things like that. But it comes from that Atlantean technology that went into Egypt and Kemet and the ancient world, and they brought it to Europe, and that went into the Rosicrucian Society and all these different types of things, and you get it in a new configuration. But we're pressing the envelope with the large plantier stone that we have. And of course, the plantier stone is in, we're talking about Lord of the Rings. That's basically J.R.R. Tolkien's thing. But he was a professor at Cambridge and had knowledge of all this information. He had the records, he had the old books, he had all of the alchemical and historical and things like that, because he was building a mythology for Great Britain. Now, Great Britain, of course, had the droids and all the other things, but utilizing Northern mythology, Brunhilde and, all of the Norse mythology. And
can I interject quickly, Kilindi? Sorry, brother. You speak about Norse, and whilst you do, just while it's on my mind, Seath and Golder. Is this familiar with? Are you familiar with this term, Seath and Golder? Seath and Golder.
Seath and Golder?
Seath and Golder, yeah. I think it's S-E-I-T-H and then Golder, G-A-L-D-R. I'm not too familiar with it, I must say, but I was listening to a chap called The Thunder Wizard, chatting with Seth Exposer, and he was talking about Seath and Golder in terms of the one person is more able then, if you like, to navigate the realms through the substances, and then the other person kind of has the, I'm not sure, like the knowledge then from this side to be able to, so for example, the person who is exploring and traveling will bring back information, will explain their experience and all the rest of it, and the other person then will be able to say, this is where you've been, this is what you were doing. Does that make sense?
Well, that's basically John Dee and Edward Kelly, because Edward Kelly was the seer, and John Dee was the translator man, the person that put it into usable information, things like that. Right. I'm not familiar with what the actual names you said, but I'm familiar with the narrative of what they were doing. You had these teams of people. One was the Earth man, and the other one was out in the yonder realms that would bring information back. So I'm familiar with that, but not those two names. So
okay.
Siegfried and Brunhilde and all these different Irish myths and things like that, with the fair folk and these type of things. So he put all that together for the Lord of the Rings. So even though we say plantier so that people in modern times know what we're talking about, a crystal ball, but it's a seeing stone, and it is also a room temperature quantum computer that the one we have is it's a broadcast crystal to personal handheld crystals that we have. You can connect to it with the handheld crystals. But so it's just an experiment in building worlds in hyperspace of being able to connect, being able to share trips and experiences, being able to download those experiences into the crystal and things like that. So that's what we're doing with that, as far as a connection with the entheogens.
Fascinating. Thank you, brother. It seems to be that as human beings, we have these organic capabilities then, for example, telepathy and, these abilities to explore. And it does seem that technology is kind of removing us away from all of these kind of inherent abilities that we have. So, for example, we're using mobile phones as communication when in actual fact we could communicate telepathically. It's my understanding of it anyway, that we all have an individual unique signature and energetic frequency and all this kind of stuff. The stuff with the crystal balls is just, the Palantirs is just fascinating, kind of the cutting edge. And do you have a team, Kilindi, a team of kind of sailors of the soul then, if you like, working together on this kind of project?
Well, there are people, you know, people who have the smaller handheld crystals are part of the project. Now, of course, out of a project, you get so many people who are active members, and then you have people who, you know, just had it. You know, it's like when you buy a exercise membership at the gym. You know, you have some people who go and they're diligent and they're there every day, and then you have folks who go the first week and then they just let it lapse. So we have people who are working inside of the space. We're moving towards next year developing specialists in the space of those people who are going in to see, those people who are going in to do battle, those people who are going in to set up spaces in hyperspace for vacation areas and things like that, because we're building a vacation space in hyperspace where you can take your entheogen and go in for the evening, because the psilocybin dose is 6 to 8 hours and closer to 6. But in that 6 hours, you can go and spend, you know, 8 months or a year in the vacation spot in hyperspace, and not have to worry about being secure and all those different type of things, or somebody robbing you or whatever. But you're taking a vacation one night, and that gives you a chance to release that stress that the human normal environment places upon all of us, by being able to take a 6-hour vacation that's actually 8-10 months a year, or whatever time constraints you put on it. So those are the type of things that we're working on, and we have a plan for next year, you know. And then of course group trips where people around the world, different places, taking the mushrooms at the same time, meeting up in hyperspace and dealing with the verification of that we were there, you know. Okay, did you see the blue duck that we placed in the middle in the middle of this thing? You know, you come back, what did you see? Well, I saw a blue duck. Well, you see it. Well, I saw a blue duck. You know, things like that.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Yes, time dilation is definitely something that came up for me. I've spent 7 years in prison for drug offences, and I did so much reading, and we were able to order books from Amazon. I did a lot of research into kind of you know, shamanic practices and psychedelic research back in the 50s and the 60s over in Eastern Europe before the kind of blanket bans and all this kind of stuff. And there were a few different threads. There was one with the history of Celtic mythology, fairy folk and this kind of things, and people going out and however these experiences occur. Perhaps someone might just be going out for a walk and end up bumping into fairy folk, go off and have an experience of multiple lifetimes, and then come back and not even a day has passed, and all this time dilation kind of thing. Patricio Dominguez talks about it with his participation in the DMT spirit molecule researches with Rick Strassman, and, you know, hyperbole maybe, but he talks about, you know, 1,000 years of experience in 50 minutes and this kind of stuff. And this is all the kind of the fascinating prospects of what's available to us potentially through all these different modalities. What kind of I'm echoing back through now. Oh, I need to sort that out. Just in case it's coming through on recording. Oh, I'm not sure why that's not happening now. But it seems to have stopped now. Okay. Yeah, this whole kind of time dilation stuff, and, you know, being able to experience time as we are familiar with it, as you say, months and months within an experience that's only 6 hours. This is all, you know, very fascinating stuff, and stuff that we need to kind of, we should be allowed unfettered access. That's the long and short of it, essentially, and that's what we're kind of working towards. And I think it's only by, you know, I know you're kind of, dare I say, a bit of a folk hero. You've got a bit of a cult following and all the rest of it. And, but, you know, that point besides, just kind of, there are so many people who are open and willing to, you know, explore these kind of things, but are just kind of put off by the, you know, the legal aspects and kind of the disinformation as well.
Yeah, well, those things are moving forward because, you know, the Denver, Colorado decriminalization, and Oakland decriminalization of all natural psychedelics. Chicago, it's purported that Chicago has decriminalized magic mushrooms, and there's a decriminalization aspect pretty much in every state going on as we speak in the United States. So that's something that we have to look forward to. And then we have, of course, you know, and dealing with the whole time thing and stuff like that. People, you know, don't understand, and scientific materialists will not go for it, but they won't take the entheogens also, you know. So it's kind of like, you know, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, or you fall asleep in the fairy ring, and you know, you go to sleep and you wake up, it's 100 years later, you know, you're forgotten, nobody you knew is still alive, and things like that. These are, you know, these are things that are part of this whole compendium of the mystery. You know, there's still a mystery here. And as I say all the time, there are no experts. There are no experts. I'm not an expert.
No, yeah.
In the dark like everybody else, you know, I'm feeling around trying to find something to, you know, a wall or something, the side of this thing, you know. So that's what it's really about. And, you know, it's not about me, it's about all of us getting a better understanding, because then we, you know, maybe it'll make people act better, you know. You know, and, you know, say I cult following, all that kind of stuff. I've never put anything up on YouTube or any of these things. I do interviews with folks and they put them up, but I've never promoted, like, you know, I do you know, a talk and then put it up. People put it up because they're interviewing me, and that's the only way that people know that I'm around, you know. And then I do, of course, conference and things like that. We have our own conference coming up in August. This is the fourth one, the Detroit Psychedelic Conference that we're putting on. We have that as a urban conference, not a, you know, Cambridge or University of Pennsylvania or Stanford or any of these particular places that are affiliated with universities and things like that. This is an urban thing of people who are actually doing the compounds, actually going in hard in the confines of their own home, in their basements. It's not a study, or, you know, it's not FDA approved or anything like that. It's just regular people. They get a chance, even though we have some of the folks who do come to different conferences and things like that. Mostly it's the people who don't get a chance to get out there and share their experiences. And that's what makes it different and unique. It's not sponsored by MAPS or the Beckley Foundation or any of the usual suspects. You know, it's just grassroots, on the ground people who are actually doing it. Because what most people don't know is many of these psychedelic luminaries have never taken the compounds that they write about and talk about and expound about. You know, many of them are scared personally. Others are scared about their colleagues and things like that at the universities they teach at and things like that. Some are just rigid in the protocols of what they deem to be science, you know, to be objective. You can't take this, you know, you can't take the mushrooms if you want to be objective interviewing people with the mushrooms. And the thing I like about Sandow's, when they first were giving out LSD to people in the 50s and early 60s and things like that, they said they used to put on the box, before you give this to anybody, you have to take it yourself. So I'm a believer in that the cook must taste the pot of stew before they give it to the people at the dinner table.
100%. Thank you, brother. Yeah, I don't think you have any kind of grounds to be talking about any of these kind of things unless you've experienced that. By all means, you know, through kind of academic research, you can have opinions, but until you've actually experienced it yourself, and as you know yourself, it transcends language, these kind of things. And you were talking about some of the experiences more weird than weird, things that just not only don't even translate, they're just so alien, so to speak, you know, beyond, above and beyond kind of the central nervous system and the human experience, just absolutely unexplainable. What I did like, it kind of made me chuckle because it kind of resonated as well, was you need to be fronting when you're out on these experiences and having kind of contact and entity contact and this kind of stuff, because my first out-of-body experience, I won't get into it in too much depth, but essentially I just shifted to this black space, complete black, no horizon, quite frightening actually. What I can only describe as a leprechaun, as bizarre as it sounds, as a leprechaun tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and I was just astonished, I suppose is the only word I can use. And I remember, and this was years ago, I was only 18 and I'm 34 now, and I remember kind of almost telepathing him saying, you're not ready to be wherever you've just found yourself right now, you ain't ready for that, back you go. And I kind of was sent back. And in the context then of, as you say, coming to a different space, an altered state of consciousness and having contact, and then this kind of, oh, kind of, who are you? And this, where in actual fact, we need to stand strong within our own kind of, yes, we are legitimate, I suppose, and we might not really understand where we are, but we have come with an intent and a purpose of self-exploration, self-growth. And as you say, it's about kind of, as I said, the fronting part, which I kind of like that. You have to just kind of, yeah, I'm kind of meant to be here kind of thing, because I've had, as I said, I don't really retain my own experiences, but I've had experiences with other people where I've been sitting and, you know, multiple different types of entity contact. One was the, you know, shape-shifting reptilians who were showing this person. They said, oh, we're going to have to show, we're going to have to do this the human way, is what they said. And they pulled up this kind of vision cube. And they were showing essentially what was the beginnings of some kind of, I don't know, project or agreement where babies were being swapped, essentially. Human babies were being taken by these reptilians, but also at the same time, these reptilian babies were being taken and brought here. Now, you know, this is just the person's experience. This is the person's experience. I don't know what to make of it. But then it just kind of also relates back to what we hear about in mainstream. Like I've had people who had experiences with Greys, for example, and you think, oh, right, yeah, okay, science fiction. But you can't take that person's first-hand experience away from them. And then obviously, as I say, we hear about all this stuff in kind of mainstream research. So it kind of fits into what you say about it all just being one trip, whether this is kind of sober, waking consciousness, you and I now having a conversation, to then going into a psilocybin experience or a DMT experience, coming back. It is all essentially, while we're alive, one kind of ongoing experience. But what I wanted to ask you about was that you said that you're done. When the time is up, you're going. You're not coming back to this place, wherever this place is. But you said it with such confidence. Are you confident that when the time comes, you will be able to leave and go, or you're not kind of, you talk about in this kind of circle of reincarnation and all this kind of stuff. What makes you be able to say that, Kilindi, that when you're done, when this experience is done, that you will be going somewhere else and not coming back? Does that make sense?
Well, I know where the spot is. I know where the different places are, and there's a choice. You know, some folks feel that the human experience is a experience that's grand, you know, and I think it's grand also, but it's not so grand that I want to be so limited again, you know. It's an experience. Okay, well, I know what it is to feel pain. I know what it is to feel fear. I know what it is to, you know, experience all these things in a physical body. So, you know, being outside of the physical body, I know the abilities of being able to be unbound, to be able to live in your imagination, to have your consciousness be the focal point of the grandeur of where everywhere else you can go. So it's just no need to come back here. You know, I've experienced these things. I've had children, I've had houses, I've had mortgages, you know.
Does this, thank you, brother.
So I've experienced those things. So I don't really need to hang around here when there's so many other things and so many other places to be able to visit.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And I think this kind of, to me personally, and relates to kind of the Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and kind of the dying before you die. And essentially that is, you know, the ego death and going into these experiences. And I suppose for yourself, who you've had many, many journeys and kind of maps, you know, kind of some of the terrain and all the rest of it, that's what's brought you to that conclusion, which does make sense to me. And I think then on the flip side, perhaps if you'd never had any of the experiences and you've only been restricted to this 5 sense physical kind of experience for the duration of a lifetime, then perhaps you might be less able, perhaps might be the right word, to navigate away from this kind of experience. I'm not too sure, but I do feel like what you were saying about dying many times, you know, and that kind of surrender to death. And I've only had one experience with a dream, actually. I was attacked by a tiger, and in the actual moment of it, I kind of just surrendered to it. It's kind of that realization of, holy shit, this is a tiger. I'm going to get away from this. And just kind of, all right then, here we go. And then just the experience change into something else. Is that how you find the experiences through psilocybin, that you kind of just have to just surrender and let it take you, and all these different kind of things occur?
Well, I mean, there's some things that are self-evident that you just have to not worry about. You know, like I said, if you remember Dormammu and Doctor Strange, when he got him in the time loop and he just comes back and gets killed this way and comes back and gets that way, it's kind of like that thing. I think I've been killed more than in more ways than there are to be killed. And after all that, I'm still here. So yeah. I know that, you know, this physical body is just this physical body. It's not who I am. It's a horse I ride, a car I drive,
Boom.
You know, that type of thing. It's a vehicle.
That's it. Yeah, thank you, brother. So they say that's the conclusions I've come to from the research. It is a vehicle, it's an avatar, however you want to describe it. All different words to describe the same thing. And a real soul can't die. You know, a real soul will just...
That's the only thing. That's one thing I found out about this thing, is that the only thing you can't do in the multiverse is die.
Yeah.
Even if you wanted to, you know.
That's it.
The only way you could know that you did is to be conscious of doing that, which means that you're still not dead. So, you know,
yeah.
It's a long way to get to these conclusions, and a lot of work. But you know, after a while, it becomes self-evident, as I said. You know.
Yeah, thank you, brother. It's kind of I liked what you said about, you know. Forgive me, I'm just paraphrasing, but it was the kind of you know, when I was a child, I dealt with childish things. Now I'm a man, I put those childish things away. And I very much the same. I've never been into sports, these kind of mediocre things, the distractions and all that. And I find no pleasure in really kind of talking about them. I'm much more in my element, in my enjoyment, speaking to people like yourself, just, you know, exploring the real stuff, the real reality, you know, what's going on around us. And it's just an ongoing kind of, an ongoing journey, an ongoing experience. And it's only through, personally for me anyways, connecting to as many people as I can, getting as many different perspectives as I can to kind of facilitate the personal journey. I've been doing a lot of research into hypnagogic light technology, for example. Are you familiar with any of this kind of stuff, the Lucia light and things like this?
Well, I've been doing mind gear since the early 90s, audiovisual entrainment with the lights and the audio sounds, white noise.
So you're fully familiar with that, my brother.
Different frequencies of the thing. So I use basically the mind gear, which is, I think, one of the more sophisticated ones. It hooks to either iPod or iPhone and things like that. You can flip frequencies. You can, you know, take the audio and visual, and you can manipulate the audio and visual. In other words, it's not just many of them are just blinking lights. These you can, you know, you can manipulate the relationship between the audio and the visual to get different hypnagogic states, different frequency states as far as mind entrainment, you know, alpha, beta, theta, delta, on and on and on, that stuff like that. So I've been doing that for 30 years.
Awesome, awesome. I wasn't aware of that, but thank you for that. I was chatting with Dr. Dirk and Dr. Engelbert. They designed the Lucia light, and his new model now, it isn't just the static flashing. You've got a controller where you can control the tempo and all the different kind of interactions between the light to drive your own experience. I've been thinking of it in terms of, I'm very interested in flotation therapy and kind of setting up a flotation center. And for those who are disinclined, then, if you like, to try psychedelics through kind of fear and the programming of they've been kind of demonized and all the rest of it in the media.
Well, Dr. Lilly and flotation, I've been doing that since the 70s.
Yeah, this is my thing. Go on.
All of the offbeat, off-track things, like I said, it all has a part inside of it to understand consciousness and how you deal with those things. But I definitely got to get on with my day here.
Yes, no, I appreciate that, but I know you're a busy fella. Thank you very much for coming and chatting with us. If was there anything you wanted to round off to before we wrap it up?
No, not really. I mean, I will. We can do it again.
Yes, that'd be brilliant. That'd be lovely. Yeah.
And greetings to all the people who will be listening to this. If you can catch me on social media somewhere, either Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and maybe I'll get you in. But thanks a lot for the interview, and I'll be seeing you soon.
You're an absolute gentleman, Kilindi. Thank you very much, brother. And I shall put all your links in the description box, and we'll catch up very soon. All the best, brother. Take care.
Have a good day.
You too.